Hey guys, what is up? I'm on my way to Jiu-Jitsu. This is the first class that I've been back to since I ripped up my Achilles tendon. So it's been about, I think it's almost 8 weeks that I haven't been back, although within the time period that's occurred, I've had a couple private lessons where I didn't really have to, go full bore. And went on holiday, had a little break, feel refreshed after the launch of Chord Tone Mastery for electric bass, which went really well. Also, just want to give a big shout out to all my supporters and subscribers on my channel, and thanks very much for getting me to over the 10,000 mark, which I was sort of working on doing. It was a little internal goal of mine to have. But as they say, and this is an interesting thing, that we have to work by way of setting goals for ourselves. This is important. It's important to have goals. But unfortunately, there's way too many people who put way too much overemphasis on a goal that they set and very little emphasis on actually doing the work that they need to do. So that's just a little food for thought today. I think it's super important because people tend to have all these ideas of what they want to do, and they're setting all these goals and they're writing it down, and then they neglect the most important part of it, which is actually sitting down and doing the work. And if you look at it's an interesting thing. I read an article recently about about how authors, mainly fiction authors who are writing stories and conceiving of these stories and conceiving of the characters, and then have to actually put pen to paper and come up with a viable thing to sell, because most fiction authors are there to sell a product, and if no one reads their book, they're not going to be doing very well. So, and when you go to school to learn how to write, you are taught, let me do this outline, let me map out all the characters, let me do character development, and they do all this work to as a sort of preamble to actually sitting down and writing the book. And they did a poll for all the major big fiction writers, people like John Grisham, J.K. Rowling, and that sort of ilk of commercial fiction writers. And they did I think they polled about 25 of these people, and who are all sort of top 10 sellers. And the thing is that you'd think that most people think actually that these guys are doing all this sort of outlining, character development, coming up with all the different twists at the different timelines of what's going on in the book before they actually start writing the book. But actually the opposite occurs. And in fact, none of these people do it like that. You see, because the actual writing the outlines and doing the character development and coming up with specific timeline development is a learning tool. That's what helps you if you don't actually know what you're doing. Because if you don't know anything, you have to, and you're interested in writing, and it's helpful to have some guidelines, just like it is when we're learning to play bass or when we're learning to be a jiu-jitsu player. So the thing about it is, what's interesting is that all these top 25 authors don't do that at all. They just sit down and do the work. So the commonality that they all have is they're doing the work. And this is major. Like, you have to understand, an idea or a goal doesn't move mountains. Bulldozers move mountains, okay? And the concept of the idea, the goal, is to enable you to place the bulldozers in the proper position so you can move the friggin' mountain. That's the whole point of it. And this is one of the things that gets missed, like, all the time. And it's really funny how people talk about, what's the shortcut to getting good, or what's the quickest way, like what's a hack to being a good bass player. And of course, you can give some tips and stuff, but they're essentially, and I think most of my subscribers and supporters and followers understand this, that there is no real shortcuts and there's no secrets. It's just the way it is. But there is, in a sense, a mindset which helps you get better quicker. And this is kind of a weird thing. Getting back into jiu-jitsu after such a long period has taught this, or I already understand this in regard to my bass playing. But I've been playing for years, so sometimes you forget these points of development and how how you got there. Sometimes it's hard to remember, as a teacher, to convey this to my students. But I try, and also certain things in my life will often bring this back to me. Like, for instance, now that I'm in this jiu-jitsu class, I'm a rank beginner, and I mean rank with a capital R. And so what's interesting is, one of my teachers, my jiu-jitsu teachers, was saying to me that, you have to just get used to being wrecked every class. Because I'm going there today. It's my first class back. I know I'm going to get wrecked. I mean, even the white belts in my school are really good. And everyone there is really serious. They're really into it. I love this club. Everyone has the bug. And here's the interesting thing. How do you get that bug? Well, you get that bug from understanding that at a beginner level, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get wrecked. That's what happens. And so when you get wrecked repeatedly, then what you do is you work to not get wrecked, right? Because it sucks getting wrecked. I mean, every time I go there, it just sucks. And so you work on overcoming specific things that you have to remember, and you kind of have to put a little bit of mental study into the whole process of this, like anything. The bass playing's the same. So what I notice with a lot of my students, and especially the guys who study with me via Skype, is that anyone who has studied with me will know that if you study with me, you're gonna get wrecked, okay? In the nicest possible way. So I don't want to scare anyone off. I really don't. But it's true. You don't come and learn to be great or just to be good. I'll get rid of the great, because a lot of people go, oh, I'll say, I want you to practice an hour a day. And people go, oh, wow, man, I don't want to be like Hadrian Feraud or anyone like that. Well, let me tell you something. If you want to be like Hadrian Feraud, you're going to have to put a lot more than 1 hour a day in. That's just a little 411 for you, because a guy like him has devoted his entire life to being great. He's like, a major top athlete. That's the comparative deal there. So, if you want to be that good, you're looking at really logging serious hours over a long, long period of time and just investing everything you can into doing it. Most of us can't do that or don't want to do that. Most of us just want to learn to be able to be competent and be able to play well, okay? But there's still quite a high standard to that. So a lot of guys who come to me, you will know that you'll get wrecked in some way, okay? And people don't like it because they feel that they're not getting better. But here's the deal, is that essentially this is the fastest way to become a great player, or just a good player, is that you really, week by week by week, are struggling so hard with what you're working on. I often tell people, look, if you come in week after week and you're nailing everything, like completely, okay, and and I'm sitting there saying, wow, man, you're like burning, you're incredible, you're great, this is amazing, then I'm not giving you the right stuff. You're wasting your time. And it becomes like an ego satisfaction deal, okay? It's hard to do, though. It's hard to comprehend. I got to tell you, when I do the jiu-jitsu and I'm humbled, like, on a regular basis. Every now and again, I might get a good position on someone, or I might make advance, and so rarely I might actually pull off a submission. I remember that in this club that I'm in now, the first time I got a submission on someone while I was rolling, and it wasn't that satisfying. Why? Because I knew the guy who I did it on. He had only just started the class, like maybe 3 weeks before, and I had been there like several months, and he knew nothing about jiu-jitsu. So it didn't feel that great to me, because I thought, okay, I got a submission, but it's not just about doing that. It's about doing that against a skilled guy who at least knows as much as you, or maybe a little bit better. And then when you get a submission on that guy, that feels great, because you feel like, wow, I'm really getting better. So the idea of, which is really the whole subject of this video, is what is the quickest way to improve as a bass player? The quickest way to improve is to understand, is to suck, basically, is to struggle, is to have, an extremely hard time with what you're learning to get better, to get to that next hurdle. And this is super important. And again, don't put words into my mouth. We always get the comments. I love as well how people comment, but they don't put their real name on their, they log in as like, Hercules, or, some kind of weird handle. And then try to rationally present some kind of argument to me. If you do that and you don't put your real name on there, I won't even comment on that, because I'm not even talking to a real person, or someone that will actually step up and take any accountability for being a real person, okay? But the idea is that I'm not talking about, building a box that someone can't get out of, okay? There are teachers that do that. And I don't believe in it because the students never get better. And, you know, this is the thing that, you know, is sometimes when I sort of say stuff and I go, listen, if you study with me, you're going to get wrecked. You know, people will go, oh, see, Joe Hubbard is like, he builds boxes no one can get out of, and his students don't get good. No, my students get great. All my students, even guys who are not, have any aspirations to be professionals. And I often say to my students who aren't pros, you're lucky. You're lucky that you don't have to rely on this to make a living, okay? And it changes the goalpost completely for them, because they kind of actually start to realize that most people who are professional musicians, I was very lucky when I first came to the UK. You know, my professional career was kind of in two bits, from when I first left Berkeley and I moved to Hawaii, and then when I then came back after 3.5 years to Berkeley and did another year and then moved to the UK. And when I came to the UK, that was when my international career really started. But I had a thriving career in Hawaii, and there was a great music scene over there. A lot of very top LA studio guys have come from Hawaii. And back in the day, it was just a great place to be. And there was loads of live music, and there was recording, and there was tours. And I did so much within a very short period of time there. When I came to the UK, I was immediately playing on a very high level. So I've been lucky in my life that I never really had to do a lot of the grind gigs. I've done them, but I haven't had to do them, okay? So, and, you know, I count myself lucky in that regard, because a lot of guys that are out there just jobbing with really what's considered to be kind of not great gigs, okay? And I'm not judging people. This is another thing that came up on the last video that I did, where I mentioned about teachers who did not have the proper lineage, and they were claiming to, you know, they were teaching certain principles. Like, you know, if you have a guy who's sort of saying, hey man, you know, here's how to play a walking bass line at 350 BPM, and he's never done a reputable jazz gig or gigs, because, you know, to be talking about that as far as a teaching methodology and guiding people, you have to have a background. That's what I'm talking about. But I am not talking about degrading people who do weddings, or people who do pub gigs, or people who do whatever. I don't care, you know, and you got to do what you got to do sometimes. And when people first start, yes, I would say take any gig, you know, that you can get, so you can get some experience. But people in the know, and there's many people listening to this that will relate to this straight away, is that there is a collection of gigs that are considered the dregs of the gigs that you don't really want to be doing. So if you can be a guy who has a passion to learn, but you do not really aspire to be a professional musician, you're actually in a better place to get better quicker than the guy who's a pro. How many times have you heard the guy who's a pro in an interview say, yeah, you know, the minute that my schedule became so busy, I can't really practice anymore? You hear that a lot. So there's a lot of guys that don't actually evolve and get better because of their career. And this is very important. And Charlie Banakis said an interesting thing to me once. And I should have actually listened to him more, but I didn't really. But reflecting back on it, you know, it's how they say, you know, you always gain 20/20 vision in hindsight. But Charlie said to me, never confuse your artistic development with what's going on in your career. Don't do it. You'll run into trouble if you do that. And he's so true. You know, it's very, very important. There are two different pathways. Now, one enhances the other, and maybe they both kind of enhance the other in a sense, but your artistic development for sure enhances your career. Okay? Because there's so many career things that have nothing to do with music, but they're important to embed into your music career. You know, there's a lot of networking, you know, being around people and learning to get along with people that you don't particularly like, and learning to play that game, understanding how things work, understanding, you know, how to play that whole deal. It's very important. It has nothing to do with music at all, and often screws people up because they think that's all that's important. So the deal is that your artistic development is your playing ability, and that is something that will always influence your career big time. Because I always say the better skills that you have, the better that you can actually, get people interested in wanting you to play with them. So, and that, you know, as a career thing, that's kind of a huge thing. So this is like super important. So I am not denigrating anybody for doing any kind of gig. You know, and guys writing comments on the YouTube thing, you know, saying I'm mean and this and that and the other. It's, you know, I'm just voicing my opinion, and it's my opinion through my experience, which is pretty vast compared to most people. So the idea is that we want to get back to the focus on this thing, that how do you what's the quickest and fastest way to improve on your bass? And the quickest and fastest way is to understand the struggle and to embrace the struggle. Because many people who struggle, they just, you know, it's almost like, you know, they feel, yeah, you know, I need to be told that I'm great this amount of times before I can learn to embrace the struggle. But it's kind of a weird thing, because that's not the way you're going to be self-sufficient. I always teach my students to be self-sufficient so they can stand on their own 2 feet and be their own players and be strong independently and develop their own ideas and opinions through their own experience. That's the way I teach people. I do not teach people to aspire to become like me. So this is like super important, but this is very factual of what I'm talking about, and it's just a thing. You know, here's another thing that I've seen. Like, I guess this has been about maybe 3 months. I've been doing yoga like every day. And I remember when I started it, you know, I was just like this complete spaz, you know, with virtually everything. And really, yoga is incredibly hard. It's incredibly hard. I mean, there's a lot of strength that you need with yoga. There's a lot of positions that put you in a position of stress where you have to learn to breathe, and it's very difficult. And I did it because a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys do it. And what I realized just yesterday through going through one of my routines is I thought, wow, I'm really starting to become so much more flexible. I mean, not that it's becoming easy, but that it's flowing more, you know? And it's seeing that little progression. But all along the way, for these last 3 months, I've really been struggling. and feeling that, you know, hey, you know, I'm like 62, you know, stop fooling yourself. You're not going to be that limber. You're not going to be that flexible. You're not going to be able to be like this. But the thing is that I already know the process. So when that voice comes into my head that says that, what I always say is I just shut it down completely, because I know that's that reptilian part of my brain trying to put me in a negative space. Okay, we have two parts of the brain. One's a neocortex. One is the what they call sometimes people call it the monkey brain or the lizard brain or reptilian brain, and that reptilian brain is that fight or flight. You know, it's that instinct thing where we just react and do things. So it's a very important part of our brain because we need it for survival. But it's also a very irrational part of our brain that is the part of the brain that puts the thoughts into our head that are negative and that hold us back. And going back to one of the original ideas in this video is that how I said we always set goals. Yeah, people can. I know guys that are masters of setting goals. They've got reams of books with all their goals in it, and they never do anything. And why? Because their reptilian brain constantly rationalizes with them how they're not good enough to actually do that, and then they never accomplish anything. Okay, so you have to shut that reptilian brain down instantly and go, no, I've been here before. I know this process. I'm in command, and this is the way you get good. So you have to embrace the struggle and just put in the time and do the work. I can't put it any clearer than that. And this is the one thing that's really missing a lot, is this. If you think about this idea that, you know, forget about like all this goal setting without doing the work. So what's the most important thing? Doing the work. Okay. How do you wade through the tides of oppression when you're doing the work? You have to shut down that negative self-talk, and you have to, realign who's in command and put in that actual time. So that struggle you have to embrace. You have to embrace the struggle, and you have to understand it's only a matter of time. I have to develop patience in order to get good. It's very important. It's very important, because you know what? 2 years from now, I'll probably be recording another video, hopefully saying that I got my first belt. And you know, I've almost been doing this a year now, and a lot of people think, wow, you know, you took like 3 years. You took like 3 years to get your first belt. This is common in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because the guys who are the next belt, which is the blue belt, these guys can really do stuff, okay? And, you know, the stuff they're meant to learn, but they still got a long way to go. It's a huge road ahead. It's the same with bass playing. It's a huge road ahead. People that think that they can get great in a very short period of time are often just misleading themselves. Okay, I'm not saying people haven't done it, but it's rare. So I'll leave you with a cool quote, which is, people often way overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year, but way underestimate what they can accomplish in maybe 5 or 6 years. Okay? In 5 or 6 years, you could become an incredible musician in a sense. I mean, you could take your level to where it is now and do incredible things from that level where you are right now. Everyone's different. Everyone's got a different base level. So I'll leave you with that quote. Hope you liked the video. Make sure to like and subscribe as always. And thanks again to everyone who bought Core Tone Mastery, and continue continues to buy it, and for all my subscriptions on my YouTube channel. Till next time, practice smart, work hard, and play creatively.